Okay, so here we are. We're ready to write some code. So we got our starter program here. We got our comment section that just documents what the program is supposed to do, who made it, and when. So now let's actually start writing some code. So depending on your past experience with either Java or programming in general, some of the things that we're going to do, at least in the start, are going to seem pretty obscure. My suggestion would be not to really focus too much on the obscure details at this point. As you become more comfortable with programming in Java, then a lot of those small details will start to make sense. But we want to focus on the big picture and not lose track of our main goal, which is just to print something out so we can actually see some action. Okay, so I'm going to put my cursor at the very end here of our file so far. So first, we've got to formally tell the computer that this program is part of our Hello World class. So we've got to do what's called declare the class. We're going to do it like this. Okay, so see what I've written here. I've got some what are called keywords. There's certain words that tell the Java compiler things about our program, our class. Public, okay, that means that anybody can use it. It's a class, so we tell it that. And the name of the class is Hello World. Okay, so remember we called it Hello World initially, so we've got to make sure that when we declare our class in our file here, Hello World, the name of our class is exactly the same as the name of our file. If there's a discrepancy, if they don't match exactly, then there's going to be a problem. Okay, so make sure the name of your class as you declare it in your program matches the name of the file that you initially set up here. Okay, now also notice I put a little curly brace here. Okay, now you'll find that curly braces are really important in Java. They're sort of like grouping symbols. They group off, help set off different parts of your program so the compiler knows which parts are supposed to go with what. Okay, so you're going to see a lot of curly braces, and so those are things that you want to pay attention to. So notice I started it off with a curly brace. Okay, and so now we're ready to start writing some code. Another thing to notice is that it's bringing in some colors. So now this part has turned green. You'll notice that in BlueJ at least, uses colors to try to help you see different parts of your program. It's just another way of helping you distinguish and make sense of different parts of your code. Okay, so we're going to write some code to print out some information to the screen, print out a message to the screen. Okay, now every application needs a main program. Okay, that's going to be kind of the default when it starts your application. It starts with that, and it starts executing stuff there. So we got to set up our main program. So we're going to do it like this. Okay, so again, remember I said there's going to be some stuff, at least in the beginning, especially if you haven't had experience with Java before, that are going to be really obscure. So let's see what we got here. We got public, so there's that same word there. So that means anybody can run it. Static, don't worry about that for now. It has something to do with um, some details associated with classes that are a little bit more specific, so don't worry about that word right now. Just know that we need to have it there. Void, again, don't worry about that right now. It has to do with something called a return type, not something to worry about at this point. Main, okay, main, so that's our main program. So our main program is called main. Every application, every program has to have a main program somewhere. Then you've got some parentheses. Notice those are different from the curly braces. They're not curly braces, they're parentheses. And inside of it, we got this kind of weird looking combination here. String, square brackets, args. Okay, again, here's one of those weird things that has to do with the history of Java. Right now, don't worry too much about that. Just know that every main program has to match this type exactly. So every time you set up a new project in a main program within that, you got to have this declaration like this: public, static, void, main, parentheses, string, square brackets, args, close parentheses. Again, it seems like a weird thing to put. Right now, don't worry too much about those details. If you're interested, I can show you where those come from, but especially if you're first starting, if you're just starting Java, don't worry about that. Just know that every main program has to look like that. Then we've got this other curly brace. Okay, so again, remember curly braces, those are important. Those tell the compiler, set off different blocks of code for your compiler so it knows which blocks go where. Okay, so that just tells the computer that that's our main program. So the stuff that's coming up is now going to be the stuff it's going to execute. Okay, so now another thing to notice is the indentation. So you'll notice that as I've added lines to it, they're indented. Indentation is another thing that the compiler tries to use to help you make sense of your code. It's a lot easier to read and understand a piece of code if parts of it are indented. And you'll see in a second why that is. So now we're just going to put one instruction to the computer, and that's to print something out to the screen. Okay, so the instruction to print something out to the screen looks like this. System.out.println, notice how that's spelled, parentheses, and I'm going to put some quotation marks. And then I'm going to put my message in the quotation marks. Okay, so let's take a look at that line. So that's the instruction, that's a line that tells the computer to print something out. System, notice it's a capital S. Okay, and in Java and most programming language, capitalization, whether things are capitalized or not, is really important. So that's a small detail that you've got to be attentive to. So capital S, system.out.println. Okay, so that's the instruction that tells the computer to print something out to the screen. Then you've got a parentheses again. Inside the parentheses is what's going to be printed out. Hello, comma, virtual world, exclamation point. Notice that's in quotation marks. Okay, so the quotation marks set off the message that's going to be printed out, and that's called a string. A string is just a words or letters, a set of stuff that you're going to print out or work with. System out println hello world. Okay, notice how things are spelled. Notice how things are capitalized or not. Notice where you have periods and parentheses. So all of those things are really important. If you miss one of those small details, then your program won't run correctly. Okay, also notice at the end of the line, I have another piece of punctuation, a semicolon. Okay, that's also important. So at the end of every instruction, you've got to have a semicolon. Okay, that tells the computer that that instruction has ended. Now you're ready to start the next one. Okay, so again, all small details. So if your program doesn't work, it could be for any number of reasons related to those. Those things are called syntax. Okay, that's the way that we tell the computer, give instructions about how to do stuff. Okay, so that's basically it. So now we've got to just end our program. So notice what I'm going to do next. I'm going to put a curly brace. Okay, notice what happened when I did that. Notice it's a closed curly brace, a right-hand curly brace. Okay, not a left-hand curly brace. And notice what happened. Notice how the editor reacted for that. So notice how the curly brace is kind of highlighted in gray. And notice there is one matching back way up here when I first started the main program. Okay, notice that pair of curly braces are matching up. Okay, so that means that that block, the main program block of code, has now ended. So now that main program is done. So anytime you have an open curly brace, somewhere you've got to close it. Okay, opening and closing braces are really important. So if you have an open brace and not a closed one somewhere, then your program's not going to run. That's going to be an error, and sometimes those are kind of frustrating to track down. So the editor does all it can to try to help you remember to close those. Okay, and notice also with the colors, notice we have that yellow section there, how it closes off. Okay, once I close the curly brace, that yellow section kind of closed itself off. Okay, if I take away that curly brace, okay, notice how it's open on the bottom here. It doesn't close itself off, so that's kind of a visual hint to try to get you to remember that, okay, that main program block needs to be closed. Okay, so I put a right hand curly brace to close off the main program block. Okay, now I notice that the green section, remember there's a green section here, is still not closed off. Okay, so that must mean that there's some curly brace that hasn't been closed off. And if you remember when we set up our class, all the way up here, okay, we had a curly brace here that we had to start off the block that contains our stuff for our class, and that one needs to be closed off. Okay, so at the very end, I got to put in a closing curly brace for the class. Again, notice how the editor kind of highlighted the two curly braces, the right hand one here that I just put, and the left hand opening one at the very top here. Okay, just to give you a visual clue as to which part of your code is enclosed in that block. Okay, notice how also the green section now closes itself off at the bottom. Okay, so everything looks good. So everything's closed off. We don't have any unclosed sections of our program or subsections. All the curly braces match up, and we have all the different parts. Okay, so again, we have our class. Okay, that's the big organizational piece of our program. Okay, that's the file that we set up initially that contains all our code. So we declare it here, public class hello world. Remember, the name of the class has to match the name of the file that we set up here. Okay, and then within the class we have our main program. Okay, you might think, well, why do we have to have a main program inside the class? Isn't it obvious that that's where the code is? Well, if we have multiple classes and we have different pieces within each class, one of those has to be the main program, so we got to tell it which one that is. So here's our main program. Remember that every main program has to start exactly this way, public static void main string args. And then within that block of the main program we have our actual instructions. So we have just one instruction, system out print line, hello world, hello virtual world. That'll print out that message to the screen. Okay, so remember, all the little syntax details are curly braces, are semicolons, are parentheses. All those small little details are really important in programming. Okay, so those are things that you want to be really detail oriented and pay attention to all of those small details.